Folks, let's get right into one of the biggest stories from last week. Now, obviously, depending on who you are, your mileage is going to vary. For me personally, the biggest gut punch was what happened with Perfect Dark. Based on it was almost my game of the show last year. The game looked amazing. I know there's been some controversy about whether it being full on gameplay or just something that the player followed or whatever. It doesn't even matter at this point. The game is no more, and that's sad, to be honest. But that's actually not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about what is going to happen with motorsport, because we did have a report, and this, of course, came from an anonymous former employee of Turn 10 Studios who said as such that motorsport is no more. Okay. And what I did is, obviously motorsport, the current game that's available took a long time to finally come into fruition, right? There were a lot of delays with it. It didn't launch with the greatest track number. It didn't launch with the greatest car number, how many cars you could race. Did it have a lot of issues? Not really, but it had its issues. Again, we're going to go right first here to Fuzzy Belvedere about how long the development was on it and where exactly Microsoft, or more specifically Xbox, and Matt Booty and the team lost faith in what the Turn 10 Studios could do, because obviously their Forza Tech engine is incredible, and that is why half of the staff is staying on as a support studio. But I have a thought and a theory, and here's why, folks. So I'm all about that evidence-based conversation. I think that if you're going to have an opinion, yes, we're all entitled to our opinions, but I like to try and add facts, or at least written articles that could back up my thoughts, rather than just me throwing a thought out into the ether. Well, I found an article from last year, and it's almost a year to the day, folks. It was written, well, first of all, it was from windowscentral.com, and it was written by Samuel Tolbert. Now, I like Samuel's work. He's a very good journalist. I've talked about Samuel on this particular podcast before, and it is an article that was released July 29th of 2024. And the lead article states, the developers of Forza Horizon and Fable at Xbox appear to be getting a third studio. The big question is, for what? Now, this is Playground Games we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. There are currently 3 studios. There is the Forza Horizon studio, there is the Fable studio, and now there is a third studio. And I think what this story ultimately does, Fuzzy Belvedere, is telegraph what happened last week with Turn 10 Studios. Because, look, folks, what we have to do is call a spade a spade. Now, I know that there's going to be some people in the chat saying, hey, Boom, you know what? I'm one of those fans of motorsport over Horizon. And if you are, that's awesome. But the majority of people that play racers, at least Xbox first-party racers, Fuzzy Belvedere, well, they are Forza Horizon fans. And the last Forza Horizon was phenomenal and had a bunch of DLC that made the game even better. It's had a ton of support through content updates and tweaking and adding additional cars and tracks and modes. It's been incredible. And obviously that earlier this year launched on to PlayStation 5 to great success. And I believe right now it is sitting at 44 plus million players across PC, Xbox Series consoles, and of course, PlayStation 5. What's interesting, and here's my thought and theory to this, Fuzzy Belvedere, is that being that Playground has now taken the lead on what will be a racer or racers from first party, and I believe that they are going to be the ones, I was going to say, speeding down the track, but that would have been a terrible pun. I really believe that this third studio, the announcement of it, well, the report of it last year was telegraphing what happened last week. And again, folks, this is just my opinion, and I could be 1,000% wrong. But why create a third studio if you did not want Playground Games to take the lead on what happens to Forza Motorsport? Because they could do a sim racer if they were asked to do it. And of course, they didn't close Turn 10 Studios like it was rumored. Yes, half the staff lost their jobs, and that is egregious on any level. But there are still half of that team that released the last Forza Motorsport there for support. I really think that Playground Games is going to take this lead moving forward. I want to get your thoughts on this. Could this mysterious third team actually be the new motorsport team, Fuzzy?
It is possible, although I'm not sure that was the original idea behind the third studio, but it now would fit and make more sense to transition them to that. There was some rumors way back when that was first talked about that they might be looking at like a flying base game, not flight sim, but something more like Panzer Dragoon style kind of thing. But that's that. Just like that rumor, there was also rumors that they were not going to do Fable and do their own RPG at some point. So things definitely can change, especially given the circumstances as far as some changes to Turn 10 and stuff like that. But as far as talking about motorsport overall, I just want to not really point out, but like some of the things that I wouldn't say upset me the most, but really disappoint me in this what seems to be a quick or unplanned or well thought out, turn of events, is the fact that yes, Turn 10 has had a target on its back for some time. People that are kind of in the know with Turn 10 have known since their delay from 22 to 23, I think it was. That's kind of put them on, I wouldn't say the chopping block, but some heads on a chopping block, because that whole from the ground, that building from the ground up, which it's not 100% the case, but there was a lot of starting over as far as the handling and things along those lines. So with all of that, they took a lot more time probably than even they anticipated, because it is going to be a long process when you start from scratch kind of deal. And looking back at it, was that the best decision? I can't say. I do love the new handling model and the new tire model that they have in comparison. But if they had just done the upgrades or the tweaks to the tire model on the previous engine, let's say update all of the motorsport cars from 1 through 4 that a lot of people had issue with as far as some of the car models, and then rescan all of the tracks, they probably could have gotten everything finished by whatever preset deadline. But then again, if they weren't doing it from the ground up, maybe that deadline would have been shortened. So it's really hard to say if that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But I do think that definitely hurt matters as far as the outlook of that team. Now, kudos to them for getting a lot of the updates and continued support that they've done up to this point, getting Forza Motorsport to kind of where they wanted to have it at launch, but time being the factor, that wasn't the case. And I said it when it was launched. It was, I called it a beautiful mess in the sense that visually it was outdoing everything that Motorsport 7 did. Although some people had some issue with some of the lighting or coloring in some cases, but it was an improvement over the Motorsport 7. Some of the other aspects could have been tweaked as far as the lighting is concerned, but the handling to me was also a vast improvement as far as the tire model, curbs, tire wear, heat and tires, things along those lines. That was all well welcomed, improvement. But because it was missing some of the key tracks that people wanted from launch, because it didn't have all of the cars, let's say, from what Motorsport left off at, because it didn't have certain modes or certain abilities as far as like the drifting and things along those lines, it definitely put a damper on its launch. And you only get one time to make a first impression kind of thing. Yes, it's the eighth in the series kind of deal. But in the grand scheme of things, that launch wasn't quite what we had hoped for, as from, well, at least myself and I would say some others in the fan base. I'm pretty sure there were plenty that were completely satisfied with its launch, but for those that were looking for, more variation in race types, more variation in modes and things along those lines, it was a little bit of a letdown, but it was something that we were all willing to be patient with in their process of updating. And they did a very good job as far as those updates. But the drawback is they already had that target on their back. It wasn't bringing the player-based numbers. And I think that's probably the biggest reason why we see what we saw with Turn 10 and the laying off of plenty of the staff and things along those lines, is that in that process of getting the game to quote unquote 100%, you weren't seeing that increase that you would normally expect in player base, like returning players when there's updates and such. It just wasn't happening for them. All the while, Forza Horizon 5 is doing gangbusters still on the current platforms, when at the time being PC and Xbox, and doing fairly good numbers on PlayStation 5 as well, when it's just brought there, I wouldn't say on a whim, but within that short period of time, and basically without any real additional support, just more so of the continuation of what their roadmap was, and then some repeats within that roadmap to kind of, extend the lifespan of that game until they release their next one. That was showing that, it probably from a numbers standpoint wasn't worthwhile continuing, which I kind of disagree. I think they could have taken some other approaches that may have helped their player base numbers. I've said it before. I've said it on social media, especially considering the events. I hope that they open this up to mod support. And it's probably been one of my biggest gripes with the Turn 10 establishment in whole, as far as, yes, I get the sanctity as far as online racing. You want it to be as pure as possible so you don't have to worry about cheaters and such. But the mod community is what keeps a lot of these sim racers, because sim racers, while some are doing rather well, they are still niche in comparison to arcade racers. So with that being said, having mods or being open to support mods would have been an approach, I think, that would have expanded, or at least, kept the player base kind of happy, because there's certain things that they haven't carried over from, Forza Motorsport 4 that people are still looking for as far as Rivals and stuff like that. Some of the stuff for Rivals and 7 even weren't in it at launch, and those things have eventually been tweaked so they are similar to where they were before, but people could have done mods for those. Myself, I being a big fan also of Gran Turismo 7, I've always wanted them to have it where we can pick from our own garage of cars to create playlists or racing lists. So that way, for those that are doing offline racing, if I want to recreate the last weekend's IMSA race with the GT3 and TCR cars and things like that, I could, without having to worry about what paint schemes they are, pulling from my friends list and their cars and such. I can make it look like an actual recreated race. And that, to me, is the big thing that I like the most about Gran Turismo. I mean, there are other pros and cons to that sim racer as well, but that was the one feature I really wanted to see in motorsport that, I can probably do with mods, but every time I've tried to do mods, I get that big scary warning, like it's going to ban my account. And that's the last thing I want to have, as far as if I'm, being into racing, is have it where, I can't do the racing at all unless I do like completely offline and it, all the time from that point forward, and, kiss off any updates that they would have done, post at or after that point. So it's a lot to take in. It's sad to see, but if the staff that they're keeping on board for maintenance of the engine, maybe they do continue to do some support or some tweaking to the existing motorsport. At some point, maybe they pass that torch in a collaboration with Playground, which I wouldn't be completely opposed, but I do like how the handling model is for motorsport at this point. I also love how Horizon is, but one's an arcade racer fully, and the other one is like a simcade, I guess, what a lot of people would refer to it as. And I think you don't want to mix up those feels. you could have a variation where you can go from Simcade to full arcade if you want, have that available, or that adjustment in the settings, which they kind of have done for the most part with all of the motorsport. But I just, the biggest thing I'm afraid of is that they're going to pass it to Playground. It's still not going to do well as far as being a sim racer per se, and they're still going to probably be close to mod support, which I think is probably the biggest Achilles heel. Like, look at Assetto Corsa. Even though Evo is in preview right now and it's working out a lot of the kinks for the next generation of Assetto Corsa, but look how old the original one is, and how many mods are out there, and how long that game has been able to stay alive and attract an audience because of mod support. I think that's the thing that, maybe Turn 10 or maybe Xbox as a whole kind of, kissed off as far as a potential option. I mean, Bethesda is very comfy with its creators and mods. With Flight Sim, it's always been flexible with its mod support as well. I think that's something that may have been missed from Motorsport, as far as being able to have something similar to what Flight Sim has, or what some of the Bethesda games have. And I think that's a missed opportunity. But moving forward, if Playground is the one that's going to carry the torch, I do hope they are open to doing things a little bit different than what maybe Motorsport had done in the past, as far as allowing us to use our cars for race lists, allow us to, import paint designs, not have to always do the painting of the cars in game, which older sims, you could, go in Photoshop, paint your car, or take actual photorealistic images and resize them to import back into the game. I think that would be something that I would like to see, moving forward, if Playground is the ones that are going to pick up the torch. You can't do full import with GT7, but you can import your own logos and designs, which saves time as far as having it, as opposed to creating a design specifically in the paint tool. But it sucks. It really sucks for those of us that are sim fans. I'm a sim fan, but I don't want to pay a monthly subscription fee. Yeah, I know I have Game Pass and all that, but iRacing is pretty much the de facto sim racer right now. It's just that you have to do a monthly fee type of deal, which I'm not the biggest fan for that, especially if I'm looking to do offline races. If I was only an online racer, then yeah, it makes sense. But you still have Assetto Corsa, and you have Evo right now that's in the works. Not as big of a fan of Competition, Assetto Corsa Competition, but yeah, it's a sad day when we lose one of the pillars in sim racing. We'll see if anything comes of it, 2, 4, 5 years down the road. But I guess Horizon wound up being a motorsport killer to some extent, considering how well it was received across multiple platforms, versus a sim racer that is meant to be niche. But I really wish that they would have stuck behind it a bit longer, because there are technical things that you can test there that would help, with the development of things in Horizon for future and stuff like that. But maybe with the team being cut down and being in the support stats, maybe that collaboration will help with innovation. But we'll see. But either way, I've rambled enough about it.
No.
Hopefully they continue.
No, absolutely. I'm happy to have this, the educated opinion on this, because obviously you are one of the biggest racer, gamers that I personally know. So whenever you talk about it, you're coming at it with massive amounts of passion. I enjoyed motorsport, but I enjoyed it enough to put a bunch of hours in and never go back. Right. Mm-hmm. I didn't spend a lot of time with it because I'm not a sim guy. I prefer being able to drive like a complete lunatic. Everyone's going to make fun of me the way I drive. I'm going over cliffs, and all I'm trying to do is get like all of the boards. And it looks like I don't know how to drive. I know how to drive, folks. I just don't mind going off-road and just being and looking ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But I understand what you're saying, but I think that, there was a quote in here from somebody. Let me see if I could find it. It was a really good one. It was from Chris Gerard. So Chris, welcome to the program, brother. Thanks so much for being here. And thanks for hanging out with the community and chatting with us. He goes on to say, Microsoft slash Turn 10 should be ashamed, should be embarrassed for the lack of content for Motorsport 8 or FORZA Motorsport. Lack of circuits was simply unacceptable. Plus, you still can't race online with friends, and AI like everywhere, like every other game. I don't know because I don't play it. I know someone had responded to Chris and said that you can play with your friends. I think he said it's offline.
No, you can play online. Although I know when me, Steel, Mav, Pong, and I think Jasper all were in the same race. It was online, but it was like you would do the practice, you'd do the race, and then you would go to the next race, and one of us might drop out, and I'm not sure why. I think they've fixed that since, but yeah, you can definitely do races with friends against other players that are not your friends. I don't know. I think there are some people that take what they hear from others and never have played the game or have tried it in a while and kind of assume that that's fact. When it comes to circuits, I had a whole checklist of numbers of the tracks. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going off of memory now without the list in front. I think there were 26 tracks, of which I want to say 23 of them were real tracks in 7. And at launch, I think there was only like 19 tracks where I think like 17 of them were real tracks or something to that effect. And then since then, they've added more tracks. They've added, I think, 2 fan tracks or fantasy tracks, and I think they've added 3 real tracks from their previous list that they had in 7. So yeah, there were some fewer tracks, but that also comes down to licensing, and that's part of the thing that I hate about these types of games, where you have to rely on the tracks agreeing to whatever price point they will accept for having that track in the game. It's almost like you would think the advertising of having the track in the game would be enough, but no, they want money on top of that for the licensing and stuff. So, and some of those tracks are tied to certain racing series, like certain tracks that were in previous motorsport are tied to NASCAR. And if you don't have the full NASCAR license, you don't get those tracks. And there's supposedly iRacing is making a non-subscription based game that will have a lot of those NASCAR tracks, but we haven't heard much of it lately. It should have actually been released last year, but still no updates as of recent. But IMSA is another series that you have to kind of work with that series for some of the tracks. And also when you're looking at overseas or non-American based racing series, those tracks also have additional licensing. Some of them have overlap because some series will race in Japan as well as in the States and race in Europe and stuff like that. But other ones are, like, with the exception of Indy, only race overseas. And those are all the licenses that they would have to pay for. And I'm pretty sure, with considering the cutbacks that Turn 10 has, their budget for licenses was probably capped. And that, shameful, yes, but it wasn't quite as bad, but it was frustrating, let's just say.
I mean, fair points all around. But Chris, appreciate you being here, brother. Crispy Bomb, you've been sitting here. You had a chance to listen to the race professional in Fuzzy Belvedere. I'm interested to get your thoughts on my theory, because again, I know that it's possible that this third team was going to do their own thing, whether it be a flying game. I know someone had put in here they'd love to see Crimson Skies. Yes, please make a new Crimson Skies. But after what happened with Perfect Dark, man, I don't know if that's ever going to happen again. We know Fable's still locked in. Fable's going to be a big game for Playground. But, I don't know if they're ever going to go. I mean, I know people are asking about the Banjo-Kazooie conversation. We're going to have it, folks. I got it in front of me. I didn't list it as a major topic because we're going to spend 10 or 15 minutes on it, because you guys know I could talk about Banjo-Kazooie for 2 hours. I know you don't want to talk about Banjo-Kazooie for 2 hours, but we do have new information. But, Crispy, let's get your thoughts on this, because, look, for whatever reason it may be, whether it be a confidence situation, whether it be they just could not, recover and deliver what Xbox wanted for Motorsport, which is, of course, their biggest sim racer. whatever the excuse or story is, the team was shuttered. They took 50% of staffers and they laid them off. And they kept the other 50%, and this is their words, not mine, that are going to be known for as a support studio for playground games. That ultimately tells me that if they are being held still there, they didn't close Turn 10. Turn 10 is a studio. It still exists. It has been halved with its staff for sure. And that sucks. But the studio still exists as we know it. They're going to be a support studio for Playground Games, who has taken the lead, right? Now, I don't think Motorsport, I know, again, there's been numerous reports, and we've actually heard from people that remained anonymous that used to work for Turn 10 that Motorsport is no more. I don't personally think so. It is a big IP, and there is a stark difference with the audience. There is an arcade racer audience. That's me. There is an audience like Fuzzy, like Chris in the chat, who like sim racing. To completely go away from it doesn't make any sense. And that's where my thought and theory comes into, well, they did create a third team. Was this third team for a new project and had nothing to do with what happened last week? Or was it possible, I guess, a telling of the tale? Like they knew that this was going to happen at some point. They knew Playground Games was going to take the lead. They knew that the Motorsport team was going to be shuttered and they were going to ultimately become a support studio. And that's where this third team comes in for Playground Games. What are your thoughts, man?
Well, I'm not going to touch anything Fuzzy said because he knows better. It's just
Indeed,
like when
sir.
I talk about Gears, okay, like he gives me that respect. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to go down this interesting rabbit hole of understanding that we don't know if they have to pay for 2 licenses for all these cars and everything else to go into both games that are called Forza. Like they start with Forza. If you really think about it, it would be logical to just call the next game Forza. And it is Horizon and a sim racer all in one. And all these licenses to these cars, yes, they might drive differently, but you can mess with them, especially in motorsport. Because, you know, I was a sim racer at one point, and then I got Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, which was supposed to be a arcade racer because it had Need for Speed in front of it, and it was not. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not really into these sim racers anymore. I want arcade. I want just having fun. If you look at the visuals between the two, I mean, I'm sorry, like Horizon absolutely destroys it in certain aspects because you're going throughout the world and it just feels different. It's almost like you're discovering something new, especially in Mexico. Like I'd never been to Mexico. Like it felt new. Not saying I played a ton of it, but most of the time I was just looking at stuff. You gotta realize that, you know, I think personally, I think Obsidian this year just destroyed their entire like we can have a studio, add more people to it, and they have such a great culture that we're going to continue to provide them what they need because they continue to deliver. And I think Obsidian absolutely, and like I've always said, like Insomniac for PlayStation, Obsidian for Xbox, they deliver. And I think Playground has shown that they deliver and they're going to continue to deliver. And if this third studio is, you know, like basically like you could put a motorsport DLC inside the new Forza Horizon, and that would like really think about that because are they paying for new licenses for these cars or are they just tweaking the the way they drive, and it's a racing, like, so, like, you know, you really go down that rabbit hole. And look, I used to be a NASCAR fan, like aerodynamics, like all these things I used to pay attention to. Okay. So what does that mean? Like, and if you really look at Playground's track record, like, they have been hitting on all cylinders for like 10 plus years.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
they have, like this past one has been a 3-year dev cycle compared to 2. Every year is 2 years for a next horizon. And this past one's 3. And then it's like, okay, like, but Motorsport was 4, but there's a quote, you know, question mark type thing going on there, because people believe that it was far greater than just 4 years. And you look at what Xbox is trying to do, why not put that under a complete just Forza banner, and maybe drop the Horizon. I know people might not like that. I understand that, but also drop the Motorsport, which people might not like that, but put it under a Forza banner that says, you know, Forza, this is where racing happens. And you know what I mean? Like something like that, like just throwing it out there. Like you could play arcade in one realm, you could play, you know, full on sim racer on another realm. I mean, the way the landscape of gaming is going right now, I think it's an absolute like travesty to watch that happen, but also there's still a support team there because Forza Tech is so important, and who knows better than a lot of the motorsport team. And if you cut it down from the people that were just making the game, and you go down to the actual people that built the system themselves, I bet you they're still there. And it goes back to saying, look at IdTech. Okay, there's still other companies, like we don't hear about it, that use IdTech. You still have, you know, the coalition over here, you know, they were the support team while trying to do all this gear stuff. Think about that. So there are just certain teams, and I think, you know, I hate layoffs. I really do. I mean, I've watched so many people get laid off from where I work and such. But if you really look at it from a, not even corporate, just like what's logical, and you say, man, like some of these studios are just great. You know what I mean? Like so good, like just have a culture inside of them that we don't want to touch, because they keep making it happen somehow. And I think Playground's one of them. I mean, you didn't hear nothing from, you know, Playground didn't get no layoffs, and they're making Fable as well, which is a totally different game than what they make. And you go and say, well, why would they only cut 50% and not close the studio of Turn 10? Well, maybe they're going to be the new A team, and they're going to include other people. Who knows? I mean, you have to have those studios that are willing to do like different things and go in on the back end and be like, oh, we could change this. We could make this look better and this and that. It's a logical thought process. I don't like the layoffs, as I said, but it's one of those interesting thought processes that I've had over the past week, I would say.